The story begins with our 16-year-old female protagonist named Sakura finds herself in the high school bathroom mentally preparing to confess her feelings to Nozaki, her classmate. When she heads to the classroom where he is, she gets nervous, but at least she is able to tell him that she likes him. Or so it seemed, as she actually said, "Nozaki, I admire you." So the boy misunderstood what she wanted to express, thinking she was a fan of his work as a manga artist, and gives her his autograph. This confuses Sakura, so she tries to explain that what she really wanted to say was that she likes him and wants to spend her life with him, which the boy takes as a good opportunity to turn the girl into his assistant, and for that, he invites her to his apartment to work on his manga. In this way, the protagonist, being at Nozaki's apartment, feels like she shouldn't be here as she's here due to a misunderstanding, but thinking rationally, she decides to stay and help the boy with his manga work, as she doesn't want other girls to take her place. So Sakura spends the entire afternoon and night completing the coloring work of Nozaki's manga panels, and after this, she goes home very exhausted. Before entering her house, she carefully observes the autograph that the boy had given her when she confessed her feelings, and upon inspecting it closely, she notices that the signature is from someone named Sakiko Umeno. Upon this, the protagonist starts thinking because she had seen that name somewhere, and that's when her mind clicks, and she runs as fast as she can to her room to look for some girls' manga, which all turn out to be made by none other than this Sakiko Umeno, whose real identity is obviously Nozaki. After discovering this, the next day Sakura begins to admire him very closely, as she never believed he was the artist behind her favorite mangas. After classes, the boy and Sakura meet at the apartment just like last time, but this time to think of a new story for a new manga. But before this, the protagonist asks the boy why he sometimes leaves classes beaten up, to which he replies that it's not for anything bad, just stress. Upon this, she gets a little demotivated, as she thought Nozaki was a tough guy who fought with thugs, but it turned out not to be the case. Ironically, Sakura saying this gave the boy a good manga idea, a story about a thug who is good to everyone but secretly bad. And after this, the girl tries to add some romance to this story, adding a girl who would be the thug's love interest, and they would meet while taking a bike ride. Upon this, Nozaki doesn't believe that a bike ride is the right thing for love to blossom. So the next day, he invites the protagonist to see if any love arises from this ride. To no one's surprise, the ride was a complete failure, as Sakura couldn't help but feel bad throughout the journey, as she felt nothing the whole time, and the boy, for his part, only ended up tired from paling so much. But even with this bad experience, he ultimately manages to create a good story for his manga, as the ride helped him know what not to do with the thug character and the female character, and thus the story was well written enough that it was a sales success. And when our protagonist looks at the manga to see what Nozaki did, she is happy to see that he made a good story. That same day after classes, they both start working on a new chapter of that manga, and Sakura, seeing the sketches of the new stories, can't believe that the boy wrote all this alone, as she considers that to have written a female character so well, surely the boy must have had experiences with girls. For this reason, Sakura asks Nozaki if he's in love with someone. He responds with a resounding no and explains that his experience writing female characters is because he once had friends he advised and listened to attentively. After this, the boy asked our protagonist the same question, to which she tells him that she is in love with someone, and when she revealed her feelings, that someone rejected her, misunderstanding everything and turning her into his assistant. Upon hearing this, the boy recommends her that the best thing in her situation is to stay away from that guy. But as she knows that guy is him, she ponders the situation both at that moment and on the train ride back home, and she can't even sleep from thinking too much about it. Anyway, the next day after classes, Sakura finds Nozaki outside her house playing with some cats, which makes her imagine a nice moment with him, and for this reason, she decides to approach him and confess her feelings to him for the second time. But it was all in vain, as our protagonist told him again, "I admire you," and because of that, he once again gave her another autograph. So all she can do is cry for having lost another opportunity to confess to him. The next day in class, Nozaki introduces our protagonist to a boy named Mikoshiba, who apart from being the boy's friend, is also his assistant. Mikoshiba is quite arrogant, as being Nozaki's assistant makes him believe he is superior to others, and partly he is, as the girls at school praise him and would love to be his girlfriends, but he obviously only sees them as crazy fans. Later at Nozaki's apartment, Sakura and Mikoshiba do their assistant work as usual, and while doing this, the redhead considers our girl not good at her job, so he hopes she won't ask for any help, which ended badly for him, as she was able to continue doing her job as if nothing, proving to be much better than him. For this reason, Mikoshiba does nothing during this afternoon of work. He just watches as the girl does everything without his help. So Nozaki, seeing this, asks Sakura to try to involve Mikoshiba in the work, asking for his help, and even though she doesn't need this help, she ends up asking the boy just by order of her boss, which resulted in both of them working together by force. After a short break, the three watch on television a program called Draw from Memory. So the protagonist comes up with the idea of following the premise of the program and motivates the boys to play this in real life. In this way, the three make several drawings to see who of the three is better at drawing, where after several drawings by the three, the only one who stands out is Sakura. But not only her, but also Mikoshiba stands out, since although he is not an expert in drawing, his specialty is details and nice decorations, and he demonstrates this by adding these details to a drawing that was on the table, leaving our girl surprised. The next day, Nozaki tries to think of a new character for his manga, a boy, but since he doesn't have models to sketch the character, he asks for Sakura's help. She replies that she doesn't have male friends, instead she has a friend named Yuzuki who could somehow help Nozaki with his character, and this is because the girl is quite energetic and also athletic, as we can see her later running at full speed, fleeing from her teacher's punishment. But this is not Yuzuki's only facet, as she considers herself a good and generous person who tries to help others, although these are simply her words, since her actions show otherwise. At one point, when another student gives her a bag, Yuzuki is too honest and hurts the feelings of the girl, and later in physical education classes, she is the only one who stands out, as she doesn't let the other girls play, proving to be a quite selfish girl. That's why Nozaki tries to understand the girl's personality well, and just when she is punished and given the task of taking some papers to the science classroom, the boy accompanies her to chat with her and try to discover her personality. During the course towards the science classroom, Nozaki listened attentively as Yuzuki defined herself as a good person who was always willing to help others. But on the other hand, he noticed that during the way, she did nothing but ruin the work of others, which led him to think that she is egotistical. And this was confirmed a little later, when the girl leaves the place, leaving him all the work of taking the papers to the science classroom, promising that she would come back to help him, but clearly, she didn't return. After this, he and Sakura talk about the girl, and as they walk towards the school exit, they suddenly hear an angelic voice singing a melodious song in the style of opera. This caught Nozaki's attention, so he heads to the singing club, where the voice was coming from, and upon opening the door, he finds out that the owner of the voice is none other than Yuzuki, which clearly leaves him speechless, concluding that he will never be able to understand this girl's personality. A day goes by, and in the middle of a break between classes, Mikoshiba, to help Sakura find a model for the character she's been looking for, introduces her to a girl named Kashima, who is called the prince by everyone at school. This is because Kashima is quite elegant, flattering, and very chivalrous with everyone, receiving praise from both girls and boys at school. For this reason, the girl and Mikoshiba were initially natural enemies, as both competed to try to be the best at everything. But in the end, they ended up being good friends. Later, after Kashima properly introduces herself to our protagonist, and after making her feel uncomfortable in front of Nozaki, she asks her about her relationship with Mikoshiba and Nozaki. This makes both the girl and Mikoshiba nervous because they don't want to reveal to Kashima that they work secretly for Nozaki, so they remain silent. Shortly after this conversation, Kashima looks at her watch and realizes she's late for the theater club, so she relaxes knowing she won't attend. But then the club's director named Hori appears on the scene to take her by force. Hours later, at Nozaki's apartment, Mikoshiba and our girl are working as usual, and while they do this, she notices two very unusual signatures in the panels, one in the shape of a cat and the other in the shape of underwear. This makes her think that Nozaki has a depraved girl working for him, but as she doesn't want to reach that conclusion, she starts looking the next day for the owner of that signature. Firstly, she asks Yuzuki, and since she responds ironically, she knows she's not the owner of the signatures. Then Kashima arrives to ask our girl for help with some things, so she ends up in the school theater painting the stage objects for an imminent play, and while doing this, Hori gives her more work, to which she accepts without complaining. When Hori hands her the last piece of wood she has to paint, the protagonist notices that the cat's signature she saw earlier is on it, and which she had been looking for the owner of all day. So now that she found it, she goes to talk directly to Hori. To her bad luck, this was not possible, as Hori went to chase Kashima and force him to work. That's why, in the middle of her anger, Sakura stops the girl, and with this done, now she can finally talk alone with Hori. She asks him if that cat's signature is his, besides mentioning the other signature in the shape of underwear, and to this, Hori responds that indeed they are his signatures, which makes Sakura relieved to know that the signatures come from a guy and not from a girl as she thought, and after a long chat, these two become friends. The next day, Sakura arrives at Nozaki's apartment to work as usual, but then she sees Hori there, so she asks him what he's doing here. He answers that he came here to ask Nozaki for help in writing a good script for his play. That afternoon, despite their efforts, they fail to achieve anything, and it continues like this until the next day when in the middle of the hallway they start talking about this, which catches Kashima's attention. So she asks our protagonist what relationship Hori has with Nozaki. Knowing she can't answer that they work together on a script, she decides to lie and tells her that the boys have a secret, which was a bad idea as Kashima got so jealous that she confronted Hori to ask him who was cuter, her or Nozaki. To this, Hori responds that he finds Nozaki more attractive, which makes her sad, so she hugs Sakura to ease her sorrows. After classes, our girl asks her what she feels for Hori, to which she says she feels love because she would like to marry him. This gave Sakura a good idea, as this love topic led her to later go with Nozaki and Hori to tell them her script idea that could serve them, which takes place at a wedding. In this way, she and Hori begin to interpret the characters of the script, and although at first everything went wrong, she does her best and manages to interpret her character so well that she impresses Hori and Nozaki. On the other hand, Mikoshiba was spying on this whole scene, and Nozaki, noticing his presence, forces him to participate in the performance, and he does such a good job that in the end, Nozaki was able to finish writing a good script for Hori, which he gives to him later, and with this, his work is done. On another day, our protagonist and Mikoshiba find themselves at Nozaki's apartment working as usual. After finishing their work, they decide to rest. At that moment, Mikoshiba asks Nozaki if he can stay overnight at the apartment, to which Nozaki agrees, exciting our protagonist. She eagerly looks forward to spending a good time together and asks Mikoshiba what plans they have besides slept. Mikoshiba responds that they'll do the usual when they're alone. Talk about girls, or more precisely, receive advice from Nozaki on how to relate to them, as Mikoshiba isn't skilled in that aspect. This becomes evident shortly after Sakura leaves, as Mikoshiba proves to be unable to even interact with video game girls. This leads to Mikoshiba's memories, where he admits his difficulty in talking to women in real life and in games. Despite constant disappointments, he never gave up. However, his obsession with dating games led him to become an expert in dealing with virtual female characters, leaving him with the challenge of learning to relate to real women. Back in the present, while Mikoshiba plays his dating game, Nozaki unexpectedly arrives and contemplates the situation, considering leaving. However, Mikoshiba encourages him to stay and persuades him to try the game, at least for a new experience. Nozaki creates a character in the game with the same name as the protagonist of his manga, and since this character reflects the female character of the manga, Nozaki rejects all the girls in the game, frustrating Mikoshiba. Therefore, Mikoshiba suggests to Nozaki that he start over, creating a character with a different name. Nozaki chooses a girl very similar to Sakura, which makes Mikoshiba suspect that Nozaki feels something for her. However, Nozaki fails in his attempts to win over the 2D girl due to a wrong choice, prompting him to call Sakura for help. She is glad that Nozaki has contacted her, but before she can respond, he hangs up, leaving her intrigued but happy to be able to help. Nozaki continues to struggle to win over the 2D girl unsuccessfully, so Mikoshiba suggests he talk to an NPC named Tomoda, the protagonist's best friend in the game. At first, Nozaki hesitates to seek help from Tomoda, imagining betrayal, but it turns out that Tomoda was a great friend in the game, helping the protagonist for years to win over the girl he loved. This discovery affects Nozaki and Mikoshiba, who after finishing the game, decide to create a love story for Tomoda. They research in the game manual and decide that the best love interest for Tomoda is the protagonist. In this way, they spend the whole night drawing the story, and the next day, our protagonist finds them both exhausted on the floor next to the love story they created for Tomoda, leaving her surprised by what two boys can do in one night. Later that same day, Mikoshiba tells our protagonist that he is very good at talking to girls in dating games, to which she asks if that experience with game girls also works for him in real life. In response, he replies more with actions than words, as upon entering school, he hangs out with several girls and starts interacting with them, although this is not entirely the case, as shortly after he sends a private message to Sakura asking her to keep the girls away from him as he feels uncomfortable. Despite this bad experience, ironically, the scene made other boys start to see him as quite the Casanova, so they ask for his help with girls, inviting him to a couple's event, which he agrees to without problems. But shortly after, he regrets it because he knows he can't deal with girls, so he asks Nozaki for help with this. Thus, in the latter's apartment, both practice different couple situations, and to top it off, Sakura joins shortly after, and the three spend the whole afternoon with this problem, which didn't reach any conclusion other than the three acting like girls in the apartment's bathroom. For this reason, in the end, Mikoshiba asks Kashima to go to the couple's event in his place, and when she tells the boys who invited Mikoshiba about this, they are surprised, but at the same time, they feel relieved to know that a girl like Kashima wouldn't steal their chances with the girls at the event. Although to their misfortune, she managed to steal all the attention, leaving them out of competition. Days later, Sakura arrives alone at Nozaki's apartment to work as usual, and at that moment, he receives a call from his editor, who is about to arrive. For this reason, he begins to tidy up the place to welcome his editor with honors, as he describes his editor as someone mature and serious. This leads our protagonist to think that this editor is an adult woman who has some kind of exclusive relationship with Nozaki, which worries her a bit. But when the editor arrives named Ken, she is relieved to see that he is simply an overweight adult man. But not only does she feel relief, she also feels a little sorry for Nozaki, as Ken treated the boy indifferently, not paying much attention to him. So after he leaves, she lets Nozaki know that his editor belittles him. In response, he tells her that it's not like that, and to prove it, he shows her several messages where Ken responds almost instantly, making it clear that he is delighted to work with him. Similarly, Nozaki lets Sakura know that he prefers to have an editor like Ken rather than one who is completely arrogant and useless, as he got a previous editor named Meino who was just like that. It turns out that before Ken became Nozaki's editor, Mano occupied that position, and he didn't do a very good job because he always gave obvious and nonsensical ideas to the boy, which led to Nozaki feeling stressed every time they talked on the phone about potential stories. Additionally, Mano always drew a raccoon in every panel of Nozaki's manga, which clearly displeased him, and now that our protagonist saw this with her own eyes, she also didn't like seeing that animal in every panel. The next day in class, she rushes to Nozaki to let him know that she found a new manga where the famous raccoon drawing appears, and this manga is really good, as despite having the raccoon as the protagonist, the manga has a deep and full of mystery and terror, which leaves them completely impressed. Seeing the name of the artist, which is Miyako, they ponder, but shortly after leaving class, they meet her, who turns out to be none other than Nozaki's downstairs neighbor. She invites the two of them to spend the afternoon in her apartment, which they agree to without problems. And once there, the three of them begin to talk about Mano, as it turns out that the idea for the manga that our protagonist read today was ironically from him. This is how Miyako begins to show the two of them the different manga ideas that Mano gave her, all of which were clearly very bad, and as they criticize these ideas, Mano arrives at the place who came to pick up some things, although he really came to continue helping Miyako with more ideas, and since Nozaki is here, he sets out to tease him a little. For this reason, the boy and Sakura have nothing more to do there, so they leave without further ado, and as they do this, Nozaki sends a message to Ken to tell him that he is happy to have him as an editor, to which he responds instantly that he will continue to be his editor for a longer time, and as advice, he asks him to put effort into it. This leaves the boy more than content, who is glad to have him as his editor rather than someone like Mano. Despite this, a small dispute between Ken and Nozaki arises as the boy's work is not entirely clear in the drawings, as the female protagonist in almost every panel does not express any emotion, and no matter how many times Ken asks Nozaki what the female protagonist wants to express, he is unable to answer him properly, which is why Ken sends the boy to try to investigate more about women, or at least about what he wants the female protagonist to express. As a result of this, the next day Nozaki is forced to act as the female protagonist of his manga, and he first begins to give homemade food to his classmates in order to feel the character's emotions, but all he feels with this is satisfaction, which clearly is not what he is looking for. Then, upon seeing Kashimo cornered by several girls, he tries to help her escape from them, so he takes a cart and takes her away with him, fleeing from the girls and finally hiding from them, and although this went well, he also was unable to feel any kind of emotion doing this. That's why in the end he gives up, and when he gets home calls Ken to tell him that he's still not ready to describe the emotions of the female protagonist, so asks for time, exclaiming that needs to study emotions for more time. On another workday, Sakura puts on some opera music to liven up the atmosphere, and she mentions to Nozaki that the singer of the song is Yuzuki. Upon hearing this, he decides to stop the music and work without it, as he prefers to listen to silence rather than Yuzuki singing, because no matter how beautifully she sings, he can't help but think that the girl is like a siren as they lure sailors with their song only to take their lives afterward, and the same he thinks about Yuzuki. And this is more or less true, as later we see how Yuzuki hits a boy named Wakamatsu, who is one of Nozaki's best friends. When these two meet shortly afterward, they have a little conversation where Wakamatsu mentions to Nozaki that he cannot sleep because he lives stressed out by Yuzuki's mistreatment and blows. Faced with this, Nozaki invites him to his apartment, only on the condition that he helps him with his manga work, to which the other agrees in hopes that at least he can sleep well there. Ironically, Wakamatsu manages to fall deeply asleep in Nozaki's apartment because as soon as the song with Yuzuki's voice started, Wakamatsu fell completely asleep. For this reason, the next day the boy asks Nozaki to kindly lend him that song so that he can sleep as well as the previous night, and although at first Nozaki doubts whether to give him the pen drive of the song or not, in the end he gives it to him after Wakamatsu promises to help him with his manga work. But this was a bad idea because this caused Wakamatsu to feel two different emotions for Yuzuki without him knowing. On the one hand, he loves the voice of the song that helps him sleep, and on the other hand, he doesn't like being mistreated by Yuzuki. That's why after being mistreated by her once again, Nozaki tries to help him to talk to the girl and try to clarify the whole situation, but Wakamatsu ignores the boy's advice and decides to follow the advice of the love manga. In this way, he invites Yuzuki to the school balcony to talk seriously, and once the two meet here, everything goes from bad to worse, because the girl cares little about what Wakamatsu thinks or says about her, while he, for his part, confesses that he doesn't like being mistreated by her, and even says hurtful things to her, but she doesn't even flinch. So in the end, in the middle of this embarrassing scene, he decides to give her some gloves to end it all once and for all. The next day, in the middle of class, our protagonist receives a distress message from Nozaki, so she takes her things and runs to the boy's apartment, and upon arriving, she finds him in bed completely ill. After this, Wakamatsu and Hori also arrive at the place as Nozaki accidentally sent them a message, but since they are here, he gives them the mission to help him finish his manga work. In this way, Sakura, Hori, and Wakamatsu get down to work to finish the boys' work. But to be honest, they don't know exactly what to do or how to start, as they have never done the part of the work that Nozaki does. For this reason, each one does what they know and can. On the one hand, the protagonist and Hori start cutting the panels, but they do it so badly that they waste a little of their time. Wakamatsu, on the other hand, only sets out to prepare some tea for the other two, although in the same way, he also started making some drawings which were rejected by both Sakura and Hori. Despite this, the three of them continue trying their best with the work, and they even asked Nozaki for help to explain to them what kind of emotion the characters express in each panel, but in the same way, each one interprets what they want, so in the end they finish the work doing anything, but they feel proud to have at least finished it. After this, Sakura goes to Nozaki's room to give him some hot soup to eat, but before she could give it to him, he suddenly wakes up scaring the girl. The next day, once he feels a little better, he recaps all the work his friends did, and upon seeing the disaster of the story they invented, before getting angry and yelling, he decides to calm down and thinks that the best thing in this situation is to ask his editor for a little more time. Days later, as our protagonist finished for school day and headed towards the school's exit, she encountered Nozaki completely alone. Approaching him, she asked what he was doing, to which he replied that nothing, as he had finished both his school day and his work, leaving him with nothing to do. To make matters worse, Nozaki had no hobbies. For this reason, Sakura invited him to stroll around the mall to try to have fun and find a hobby, although her real intention was to have a date with him. Unfortunately, this whole pseudo-date went wrong. Once at the mall, Nozaki couldn't stop thinking about his work. Every activity they did somehow ended up involving the characters from his manga. They reached the point where he even tried on a sailor suit to see how it would look on the female protagonist of his manga, but as he was a tall and muscular man, the suit was too short for him. Shortly after, they ran into Mikoshiba, who was buying some 2D girl action figures, which created an awkward moment between the three. The situation worsened when Nozaki asked Mikoshiba to try on the sailor suit he had bought, which annoyed him so much that he ended up throwing Nozaki and Sakura into the air. After this, Sakura went to the mall's bookstore to buy some things for her art club, and Nozaki accompanied her. Between the two of them, they ended up buying quite a few things, and then they left the mall to go home. This embarrassing and unenjoyable experience left Sakura feeling a bit sad, as she thought she would finally have a date with the boys she liked, but it didn't turn out that way. Fortunately, Nozaki suddenly invited her to dinner at his house, to which she obviously agreed more than happy, thinking that she would finally have a date with him. It was more or less like that, as when they arrived at Nozaki's apartment, she ate the food he prepared for her, and shortly after he gave her a gift, the famous sailor suit he had bought at the mall. This discouraged Sakura, as she knew he wanted her to model for him using the suit, but obviously she had no intention of doing so. However, fortunately for her, Mikoshiba arrived at the place, and it was he who ended up modeling for Nozaki. Ironically, this led Sakura to ask Nozaki the next day to model for her art club, as she saw that he had modeled well the day before. Mikoshiba initially refused, but then accepted to model for them due to the insistence of several girls from the club. For that reason, later at home, Nozaki started practicing various poses using his action figures, but since he only had 2D girl figures, he ended up imitating feminine poses, which discouraged him a bit. The next day, he went to the art club with all the attitude to do his modeling job. He did a very good job just following the orders of the girls and staying still. However, staying still for a long time proved exhausting, so after doing many poses, Mikoshiba thought about retiring, but he didn't know how to say it. Fortunately for him, Nozaki arrived at the club, which delighted Mikoshiba, as he knew he would help him escape. However, everything turned upside down as Nozaki became just another member of the club and briefly took over the place, ordering all the girls in the club to model alongside Mikoshiba, leaving him as the only draftsman. After this, the girls in the club thanked Mikoshiba for modeling for them. Amid feeling needed by them, Mikoshiba commented that he would be willing to model as many times as they wanted, showing himself a little arrogant and conceited. However, shortly after, he regretted it as he discovered that he has a flaw that makes him say things he doesn't really feel, and he only says them to please others. On another completely new day, Kashima mentions to Mikoshiba that Hori is acting strangely towards her. She has noticed that he is more distant and colder than usual and wonders why. All of this has an explanation. Days before, Hori was at Nozaki's house and borrowed a girl's manga. The next day, that manga ended up in Kashima's hands after Hori threw his backpack with the manga inside to her. Upon inspecting the manga, Kashima is left speechless. The content is overly sweet and tender for her taste. For a moment, she thinks that the owner must be some needy boy craving affection. However, upon closer inspection, she is surprised to see the owner's name, Hori. For this reason, she later talks to Mikoshiba to tell her the story of the manga. Both end up interpreting a romantic scene, where Kashima does not quite understand the premise of the manga's love story, as she considers the female protagonist rather foolish for admiring the male protagonist too much. This leads her to talk to Nozaki about the same thing, but he, as the creator of the manga, only talks about his experience drawing the story and the characters. Hours later, during a theatrical rehearsal, Kashima realizes that Hori enjoys playing the princess role very much. Therefore, after finishing the rehearsal, she asks him what skirt he considers appropriate for her. In reality, she asks, thinking of him. Later, that same skirt ends up in Hori's locker, which greatly annoys him. This situation worsens when Kashima considers him the best candidate to play the princess during the selection of leading roles. This annoys Hori even more, who finally throws several markers in her face. Hori's hatred towards Kashima escalates even further when she puts different female garments in his locker for several days, insisting that he should play the princess role. The next day at Nozaki's apartment, Sakura, Wakamatsu, and Hori are helping the mangaka as usual. However, Hori cannot do a good job as he always exceeds the number of backgrounds and panels, forcing him to redo his part. Nozaki tries to motivate him by reminding him that he also made bad backgrounds at first and still won novice mangaka contests. But even with this motivation, Hori still can't do his job well. Nozaki intervenes to show him how to do it, but ironically, he does an even worse job than Hori, drawing the characters with strange perspectives and solving the problem with simple boxes over the characters to maintain a decent perspective. Hori complains about this, so the next day, Nozaki asks Kashima for help. She recommends using photos as a reference to learn to draw perspectives. So Nozaki puts Kashima and Hori on stage to take a picture of them and use it as a reference. Although the photo turned out well, Nozaki becomes obsessed with the height difference between Sakura and Hori and resorts to the boxes again to equalize them, which annoys Hori again. Later that same day, Hori mentions to Kashima that he will stay late at Nozaki's house working. For a moment, Kashima thinks about learning to draw like Hori so she can stay late at her beloved's house. However, this does not end well for Hori, as the next day during a rehearsal at the theater club, he falls asleep for seconds and upon waking up, sees the famous box that has been bothering him, which causes him to hit it and Kashima to fall to the ground, followed by himself completely asleep. Seeing him like this, Kashima cannot help but still see him as a princess and brings out her prince's side, leading him to the infirmary in a funny and extravagant way with a horse mask on her head. Hori, waking up in the middle of the way, is surprised and scared to see someone with a horse mask leading him to the infirmary. Once there, Kashima reveals her identity, which brings a little tenderness to Hori. For this reason, we see that Hori is more motivated in his work after the experience of being led by a horse girl, as it inspires him to write a love story based on it. Amidst a rainy day, our protagonist finds herself trapped by the rain after realizing she forgot her umbrella, making it difficult for her to return home. Fortunately, Nozaki appears just in time to help her, but upon discovering that he also forgot his umbrella, they find themselves in the same situation. Faced with this predicament, Nozaki tries to use his jacket as protection for Sakura, but the intensity of the rain causes the jacket to become soaked, leaving them with no choice but to take refuge in the school until the rain stops. While they wait, Nozaki begins to brainstorm scenarios for his manga, drawing inspiration from the current situation. Unexpectedly, Yuzuki appears to give Sakura an umbrella before quickly leaving. With the umbrella in hand, they both embark on the journey back home, facing several embarrassing situations, from Nozaki accidentally getting soaked by Sakura to her being splashed by a puddle, culminating in both of them sharing a mishap with a passing car. Despite the setbacks, Sakura enjoys Nozaki's company under the umbrella, imagining idyllic scenes that make her wish to prolong the moment. However, her illusions fade when Nozaki mentions having forgotten his clothes on the clothes line. Later, upon arriving home, Sakura finds solace in a cup of hot tea, but her tranquility is interrupted when Nozaki retrieves the infamous sailor outfit, insisting that she wear and model it for him, a proposal she vehemently rejects. A few days later, Sakura and Nozaki gather at Miyako's house to review their latest manga and seek inspiration, but they face the same situation as always. All their manga are played with raccoons due to Meino's insistence. Nozaki tries to motivate Sakura to complain to Meino, or at least raise her voice against the editor, but she reveals that, although she complains over the phone, she always ends up giving in to him, as evidenced by her works, where the original dialogues are radically changed by Meino to adapt them to an adult audience. This attitude of Sakura infuriates Nozaki, who demands that she not let herself be manipulated by the editor. Coincidentally, Meino calls Miyako, providing the opportunity to express their complaints, but in the end, Sakura once again gives in to Meino's manipulations, disappointing Nozaki. In an attempt to change the situation, Nozaki suggests to Sakura to use reverse psychology in her works, proposing that she include raccoons as main characters to dissuade Meino from his insistence. Ironically, Meino likes this new approach so much that he praises Sakura for hours, but she ignores his comments and moves on to a new plan, creating a raccoon character with a cold, emotionless personality, although this attempt also fails when Sakura falls in love with the character. Noticing Sakura's interest, Nozaki consults his editor Ken about ideas for his manga, aiming to add more humor and fantasy to compete with Miyako. However, Ken is not convinced and rejects the ideas, prompting Nozaki to get straight to the point and try to please Sakura by drawing characters in raccoon costumes, but she rebukes him for mimicking Miyako and demands more originality with his own characters. Switching scenes on a completely new day, Wakamatsu visits Nozaki's house seeking help. It turns out Yuzuki invited him to the movies and he's unsure about accepting the invitation due to their conflicting relationship. Faced with this situation, Nozaki encourages Wakamatsu to accept Yuzuki's invitation, leaving him with no choice but to attend. However, unsure of how to behave on the date, Wakamatsu seeks inspiration from Nozaki's manga. Thus, the boy meets Yuzuki at the cinema, but the outing results in a series of unfortunate events. Yuzuki monopolizes Wakamatsu's space, taking his armrest, drink, and popcorn. During the movie, Wakamatsu enjoys himself and laughs at the character's jokes, while Yuzuki laughs at the protagonist's misfortunes, making him question the girl's sanity. The situation worsens when, after the movie, they argue about it. Yuzuki praises the villains, and Wakamatsu grows tired of her comments, eventually shouting at her to shut up. Back home after this date, Wakamatsu regrets going, but changes his mind when Yuzuki mentions she has tickets to the amusement park and plans to use them with other guys, sparking jealousy in him and making him insist she invite him instead of others. The next day at school, Wakamatsu has an unresolved issue, finding the singer responsible for the song that helps him sleep at night. To do this, he spies on the singing club but doesn't dare to enter, so he asks Hori for help. The latter enters the club without any issues and instead of providing Wakamatsu with an answer, suggests the idea of doing a musical. This news discourages Kashima, who discovers she can't sing. Kashima asks Yuzuki for help improving her voice and jokingly, she demands they kneel and beg before offering her help. Despite it being a joke, Kashima agrees. After a disastrous vocal test, Yuzuki suggests Kashima either quits the musical or starts practicing immediately. The next day, Kashima receives training in the singing club, and Wakamatsu spies again, traumatized by Kashima's off-key voice. Later, Kashima and Hori rehearse for a play about princes fighting, where Hori has a leading role. During the rehearsal, Kashima acts unconventionally due to her happiness for Hori's role. During a particular fight, both feel a mix of emotions. Kashima can't defeat Hori because of her love for him, and Hori doesn't want to defeat Kashima because he doesn't want to see her sad. Facing this situation, Hori invites Nozaki to replace Kashima in the role, but it turns out to be a failure. Nozaki tries to justify his performance by saying he needs the protagonist's costume, but since it's occupied by Kashima, he ends up wearing a bear costume that doesn't improve his performance. As a last resort, the group calls Mikoshiba, who succeeds in the role, although Hori stays among the audience. During a rehearsal, Hori notices Mikoshiba's motivation and encourages him from the audience, leading Mikoshiba to win the battle against Kashima in rehearsal. This plunges Kashima into sadness as she can't believe Hori encouraged Mikoshiba instead of her. Additionally, she notices how nervous Hori gets talking to Mikoshiba, raising doubts in her. The next day, Hori mentions to Nozaki that he has another rehearsal for the play, this time with Mikoshiba invited, suggesting they are becoming close. During the rehearsal, Mikoshiba hides in a room, but with Hori by his side, he'll be forced to change his attitude. Days later, while Nozaki and our protagonist work as usual, the latter becomes curious to learn more about the boy's editor, namely Ken. Nozaki responds to this with the story of how they met and became friends. It all happened over a year ago after Nozaki decided to fire Meino. He immediately got in touch with Ken, the editor suggested by Meino. Initially, Nozaki and Ken didn't get along. The former wanted to keep his distance and didn't consider him a friend as he didn't like him. However, after a meeting where Ken showed great interest in his work, Nozaki was happy to find someone who appreciated his efforts, leading to a friendship and collaboration between them. Returning to the present, Nozaki runs out of ideas for new manga stories, so he asks Sakura for help. She suggests he try something innovative that includes surprise. Nozaki creates several sketches of surrealistic stories, but none fit the romantic theme of his manga. Sakura insists he focus on the surprise factor to generate new ideas. This leads to Nozaki making efforts the next day to surprise Sakura in various ways, from becoming her bench to giving her flowers. However, the real surprise for Sakura is when, during recess, Nozaki gives her several meals that she enjoys greatly. This inspires Nozaki to create a new story based on this latest experience with our protagonist, but unfortunately, Ken doesn't like it as the story was solely based on food, which would classify it as a cooking story. In the evening, a sudden rain forces Wakamatsu and Mikoshiba to take shelter at Nozaki's house, where he and Hori were planning to work on a manga. While Nozaki and Hori chat in secret, Wakamatsu and Mikoshiba meet for the first time. Seeing that the rain will prevent their secret work, Hori starts cooking. To calm Hori down, Nozaki leaves him alone, which forces him to interact with the others. When they try to turn on the TV, they end up showing drawing materials, hinting that the three of them work for Nozaki, but they decide to act as if nothing happened. After dinner, Mikoshiba and Wakamatsu thank Nozaki for the meal while Hori, away from them, discovers that Nozaki has been writing about a story involving all four of them. In addition to detailing the dinner, Nozaki has included moments between Mikoshiba and Wakamatsu and a scene with Hori. When Hori discovers him writing, Nozaki includes him in the story, which annoys him. Finally, Nozaki decides to let the three of them stay overnight to use them as inspiration for more stories. He asks them to do something other than talk, but they end up talking amongst themselves, which causes Nozaki to fall asleep. The three of them try to wake him up, but they end up arguing and eventually also fall asleep. On another day at school, Yuzuki and other classmates are in the classroom, chatting about gifts they received from boys in the past. When our protagonist arrives, they ask her if any boy has ever given her anything. Sakura recalls the day Nozaki gave her his autograph. The girls suggest it would be better for Sakura to stop talking to him, but she carries chocolates with her since Valentine's Day, indicating she has no intention of distancing herself from him. These chocolates were supposed to be for Nozaki on Valentine's Day, but she didn't find the right moment to give them to him as he was always busy and inadvertently avoiding her. Later, Yuzuki and Kashima encourage Sakura to give the chocolates to Nozaki. While looking for him in the hallway, she bumps into him, causing the chocolates to fall to the ground. This upsets her, so she forces Nozaki to eat at least one. Despite this, the boy wants to make amends and offers to fulfill a wish. Sakura simply chooses a candy, which puzzles him a little. In the evening, they attend a summer festival together wearing yukata costumes. As they stroll through the festival, they encounter Mikoshiba and Kashima and later Yuzuki and Wakamatsu. Although the latter are busy with another activity, Wakamatsu thinks Kashima is Yuzuki's boyfriend and feels a little depressed about it. Sakura separates from her group and ends up coinciding with Nozaki. He admires her beauty in the yukata, which makes her nervous. They decide to go to a park overlooking the city to observe the festival from there. Nozaki takes photos from an attraction while Sakura can't climb due to her yukata costume. Nozaki lifts Sakura, which reminds her of how they met at the school entrance ceremony. Back in the present, as they watch the fireworks, Sakura recalls her experiences with Nozaki and admits aloud that she likes him. Nozaki responds that he also likes fireworks, surprising Sakura until he clarifies that he also likes fireworks. Nevertheless, Sakura feels happy knowing she can count on him. On another completely new day, Wakamatsu can't stop thinking about the guy Yuzuki went out with on the day of the festival. Since he likes her, he wouldn't want her to go out with other guys, especially not a very handsome one. That's why he asks Nozaki if he knows the guy, or at least if he knows if Yuzuki is dating that guy. Nozaki is surprised by this, as it's the first time he's heard that Yuzuki is involved in anything related to love. His mind dissociates, and he starts sketching various stories of a love triangle between the girl, Wakamatsu, and the other guy, who happens to be none other than Kashima. Having not received a direct answer to his question, Wakamatsu later asks Hori the same thing while going to class with him. Even he isn't able to answer with certainty, as he just compared that guy Wakamatsu keeps mentioning to Kashima, which is ironic because in the end he compared Kashima to Kashima. Similarly, all of this is set aside when Hori invites Wakamatsu to go on vacation outside the city, to which he agrees to go. Kashima later finds out about this invitation and invites both Yuzuki and Mikoshiba, as well as our protagonist, and everyone ponders whether to go or not. Anyways, all of them end up accepting after Kashima convinces them to go on vacation together, something that surprises Wakamatsu as he can't believe that this guy was able to easily persuade the girls. Well, not just the girls, but also Mikoshiba. Because of this, after overhearing that group's conversation, Wakamatsu goes to the mall to spy on Kashima more closely. When Kashima and the girls arrive at the place, he sets out to do his spying work, but he does it so poorly that Kashima can't help but feel that the boy behaves like a complete depraved. And on Wakamatsu's side, throughout the time following Kashima, he notices that he gets along very well with both Yuzuki and Sakura, which makes him somewhat relieved but also puts him in a bad light in front of them, as he is shyer and more embarrassed than Kashima. Due to these nervous attitudes, Yuzuki asks the boy if he's okay, as he seems restless, almost like he's about to rob the store. In response, Wakamatsu tells her that he's more than calm, and to prove it, he shows her a bikini that would match her body type, which was a bad idea because it ended up embarrassing him in front of her, forcing him to distance himself from her and go talk to our protagonist about it. Hours later, the boy meets with Nozaki to tell him everything that happened. In short, he tells him that indeed Yuzuki and Kashima are dating, and he confirmed this when he was in the store and saw how well they got along. After telling him this, Wakamatsu makes some drawings to show Nozaki what the boy looks like, and when he hands it over, the latter realizes that the boy he's talking so much about is none other than Kashima. Days later, the protagonists finally take their agreed-upon vacation, where we can see that, at first, Mikoshiba and Nozaki chat about the beautiful view of the beach and the girls in bikinis. At one point, Nozaki had trouble with the place's guard because he wanted to take photos of the beach view, but the guard thought he was taking pictures of the girls, so he was asked to leave the area. Shortly after, Nozaki mentions to Sakura several stories that come to his mind at the moment, all involving characters from his manga doing romantic things. After asking for her opinion, she responds that all she can say is that she feels jealous of those scenes. On the other hand, before entering the sea, Wakamatsu manages to see that Kashima is followed by several boys and girls, which impresses him as he sees that her beauty causes a multitude of people to stick to her like glue. Returning to our protagonist and Nozaki, they enter the sea, and after them, Wakamatsu also enters. Finally, after being able to shake off her fans, Kashima is the last to enter. Wakamatsu, seeing her in regular clothes, asks if she plans to swim like that, and she responds that she actually has a bikini. This makes the boy nervous, while Kashima enjoys having made him feel that way. On the other hand, Mikoshiba can't find our protagonists anywhere, so he starts searching for them. While doing so, some girls approach him to invite him to play beach volleyball. He hesitates for a few seconds, as he would love to play with those beautiful girls. However, in that moment of thought, another guy approaches the girls and invites them to eat, and they accept without any problem, leaving Mikoshiba without any company. Because of this, he goes to the beach restaurant to try to talk to some girls and try to make a connection with them. However, every question they ask him, he answers in the most goofy and nonsensical way possible. After this, Mikoshiba finally meets up with our protagonist and Nozaki, and the three of them notice that the beach lacks excitement and fun. So when they see Wakamatsu involved in an embarrassing situation with Yuzuki and another girl, they start mimicking them from afar, inventing a love triangle story. A little later, Sakura wants Yuzuki to show her how to flirt with boys, to which she agrees to teach her. Yuzuki first goes underwater and shortly after resurfaces. Then she asks the boys to swim as far away as they can. However, when she sees the boys without their swim trunks, she starts to grasp Yuzuki's approach a bit better. Because of this, she tries to help the boys by bringing them their swim trunks, but she can't find them. Luckily, Kashima finds them, so our girl asks for them and goes straight to the boys to give them back. Upon seeing her approach with their swim trunks, they begin to feel relieved. However, when Sakura throws the swim trunks to the boys, everything goes wrong as she throws them a short distance, and then a wave carries the trunks away. Nevertheless, this amusing anecdote serves as great material for Nozaki to later write a good script for a new chapter of his girl's manga, which he shows to our protagonist upon completion. Upon seeing it, she can only feel pity, thus finishing this cute and funny anime.